My sister's family lived in my house rent-free for 5 years. When I asked for help with medical, she laughed, a sound that still echoes in my ears, sharp and cutting like shattered glass. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Family is meant to stand by you when the world turns its back, but sometimes family becomes the very thing that breaks your spirit. It all started 5 years ago, during a time when life felt more hopeful than heavy. I had just inherited my grandmother's house, a charming little cottage with ivy climbing up the stone walls and windows overlooking an old oak tree whose branches seemed to stretch toward the heavens. The place was far from perfect. It needed repairs, fresh paint, and some serious TLC, but it was mine. A sanctuary where I could finally breathe easy after years of living paycheck to paycheck in cramped apartments. That's when my sister Emily showed up on my doorstep one rainy evening with her husband, Mark, and their 2 kids in tow. They looked tired, bags under their eyes, clothes damp from the storm outside, but they carried themselves with a kind of desperate confidence, as if they already knew what I would say before they even asked. "Hey," Emily said, brushing wet strands of hair out of her face. "We need a place to stay for a while." I remember standing there, gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to tell them no, to explain that I couldn't afford another mouth to feed, let alone 4. But then I saw the fear in her eyes, the way she shifted uncomfortably as though bracing herself for rejection. And I caved. How could I not? She was my sister, the person who used to sneak into my room at night when we were kids and whisper stories about magical lands only we could see. We may have grown apart over the years, but blood still tied us together, or so I thought. "You can stay," I said finally, stepping aside to let them in. "But just until you get back on your feet." Emily smiled, relief washing over her features. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling me into a hug. "You won't regret this." Oh, how wrong she was. At first, things weren't so bad. Having company filled the empty spaces in the house, made it feel less lonely. The kids, Lila, who was 8, and Noah, who was 6, ran through the halls laughing, their tiny hands leaving smudges on the windows. Mark fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, something I'd been meaning to do for months but never got around to. Emily helped me repaint the living room, her laughter mingling with mine as we dripped paint onto the floor despite our best efforts. For those initial weeks, it almost felt like we were building something new, a family unit stitched together out of shared meals and late-night conversations. But slowly, imperceptibly, the cracks began to show. The first sign came when Emily stopped mentioning finding a job. At first, she claimed she was focusing on getting settled, which I understood. Moving is hard, especially when you're juggling 2 young children. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and still, she hadn't applied anywhere. When I brought it up gently one afternoon, she waved me off. "I'm sure something will come along soon," she said breezily, flipping through a magazine without looking at me. "Besides, Mark's working overtime right now. He's bringing in enough for both of us." Except he wasn't. Not really. Sure, Mark worked long hours at the warehouse, but his salary barely covered groceries and utility bills. Every month, I found myself dipping deeper into my savings to make ends meet. The mortgage payments became harder to manage, and the stack of unpaid medical bills on my desk grew thicker with each passing day. And then there were the nights when Emily and Mark argued behind closed doors, their voices rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it wasn't my business, but curiosity and concern got the better of me one particularly heated evening. Pressing my ear to their bedroom door, I caught snippets of their conversation. "You promised we wouldn't rely on her forever." Mark hissed. "She's family." Emily shot back. "What's the big deal? She has the house. It's not like she needs the money." That stung more than I cared to admit. Because the truth was, I did need the money. My health insurance premiums kept going up, and my chronic migraines required expensive medication that drained my bank account faster than I could refill it. I'd been putting off doctor visits for months, hoping the pain would subside on its own. But it didn't. If anything, it worsened, spreading from my temples down to my neck until every movement felt like torture. One morning, unable to take it anymore, I called Emily into the kitchen. Her expression softened slightly when she saw how pale I looked, dark circles etched beneath my eyes like bruises. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting down across from me. "I need help," I admitted, hating how weak my voice sounded. "With the medical bills. I can't keep doing this alone." She stared at me for a moment, her lips twitching upward in what might have been amusement or disbelief. Then she laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound that sent chills down my spine. "Are you serious?" she said, shaking her head. "After everything we've done for you?" I blinked, stunned. "What exactly have you done for me?" "Well, we've been here, haven't we?" she replied, gesturing vaguely around the room. "Taking care of the house, keeping you company. You'd be miserable without us." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was that really how she saw things? As if her presence somehow justified taking advantage of me? "Emily," I began, my voice trembling, "you've been living here rent-free for 5 years. 5 years. Do you have any idea how much that costs?" She rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair with an air of casual indifference. "Oh, come on. Stop being dramatic. It's just money." Just money. Those 2 words burned inside me, searing my chest like hot coals. Money wasn't just numbers on a screen, it represented security, stability, freedom. Without it, I was trapped, weighed down by responsibilities I couldn't escape. But Emily didn't seem to understand, or maybe she simply didn't care. Over the next few days, she avoided me, retreating into her own little bubble with Mark and the kids. Whenever I tried to bring up the topic again, she changed the subject or brushed me off with vague promises to figure something out later. Later never came. Meanwhile, my condition continued to deteriorate. Simple tasks like cooking dinner or folding laundry left me exhausted, and the constant throbbing in my head made it impossible to focus. Still, I refused to give up. I started looking into alternative treatments, scouring the internet for affordable options. Maybe acupuncture could help. Or maybe meditation. Anything to ease the relentless pressure building inside my skull. Then came the day I received the letter, the final straw that broke whatever fragile resolve I had left. It was from the hospital, notifying me that my outstanding balance had reached critical levels. If I didn't pay within 30 days, they would send the account to collections. Panic surged through me, cold and suffocating, as I realized I had nowhere else to turn. Desperate, I knocked on Emily's bedroom door late that night. She opened it wearing a robe, her hair messy from sleep. Behind her, Mark lay sprawled on the bed, snoring softly. "We need to talk," I whispered urgently, stepping inside before she could protest. She sighed, crossing her arms over her chest. "This again? Look, I told you." "No," I interrupted, my voice firmer now. "Listen to me. This isn't about asking for charity. It's about fairness. You've been living here for free for half a decade. Half a decade, Emily. All I'm asking for is some contribution, not even close to covering the full cost, just enough to help me stay afloat. Is that really too much to ask?" For a moment, she looked genuinely conflicted, guilt flickering across her face like a shadow. But then her expression hardened, and she shook her head. "I'm sorry," she said flatly. "We can't afford it." Can't afford it. The phrase echoed in my mind, hollow and mocking. Couldn't afford it? How could they not? Mark worked full-time, and Emily spent most of her days lounging around the house, scrolling through social media or watching TV. Yet somehow they always managed to scrape together money for luxuries, new clothes for the kids, takeout dinners, even a weekend getaway to the beach last summer. Anger bubbled up inside me, hot and uncontrollable. "You mean you won't afford it?" I snapped, my fists clenched at my sides. "Because God forbid you actually contribute to the roof over your head." "That's not fair," she shot back, her cheeks flushing red. "We're doing the best we can." "The best you can?" I repeated incredulously. "Do you even realize how much I've sacrificed for you? For all of you? I gave up my savings, my peace of mind, my future, all because you begged me to let you stay. And now when I'm drowning, you refuse to throw me a lifeline." Tears welled up in her eyes, but whether they were genuine or manipulative, I couldn't tell. "You don't understand," she muttered, turning away. "Things are complicated." Complicated. I echoed, my voice rising. "Try living with crippling debt and debilitating pain. Try waking up every morning wondering how much longer you can hold on before everything falls apart." Mark stirred in the background, groggily calling out Emily's name. She glanced over her shoulder at him, then back at me, her jaw set in defiance. "I'm sorry," she said again, though her tone suggested otherwise. But we can't help you. Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could. Standing there, staring at the sister who once promised to always have my back, I felt something inside me shatter. Betrayal, resentment, grief, they swirled together in a toxic cocktail that left me reeling. As I walked back to my room that night, I realized I had two choices: continue letting them leech off me until there was nothing left, or find a way to reclaim control of my life. The question was, how far was I willing to go to protect myself, and what price would I have to pay to do it? The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and mounting tension. Every creak of the floorboards, every murmur from Emily's room, felt like an intrusion, a reminder of how my sanctuary had become a battleground. I tried to focus on work, on anything outside the four walls of the house, but my mind kept circling back to the same question: what now? I couldn't keep living this way. My health was deteriorating faster than I could manage, and the financial strain was suffocating. The hospital's letter sat on my desk like a ticking time bomb, its words glaring at me every time I walked past. But the thought of confronting Emily again filled me with dread. She had made her position clear: she wasn't going to help. And yet they were still here, occupying space in my home as if it belonged to them. One evening, after another long day of trying and failing to ignore the elephant in the room, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Emily wouldn't contribute willingly, then maybe it was time to force the issue. I called a family meeting, not because I believed they'd suddenly change their minds, but because I needed witnesses when I laid out my terms. When everyone gathered in the living room, Lila and Noah bouncing excitedly on the couch while Mark scrolled through his phone, I cleared my throat and began. "I need to talk to all of you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "This isn't easy for me, but we can't keep pretending everything is fine." Emily frowned, her arms crossed over her chest. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you've been living here rent-free for 5 years, I replied, meeting her gaze head-on. "And during that time, I've shouldered the costs of this house, mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, all without asking for anything in return. But I can't do it anymore. Not when I'm drowning under medical bills and debt." Mark finally looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed. "So what are you saying? You want us to leave?" "No," I said firmly. "At least, not unless you refuse to cooperate. What I'm proposing is simple. Starting next month, I expect you to start paying your fair share. Rent, groceries, whatever you can afford. It doesn't have to be much, but something is better than nothing." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the kids stopped fidgeting, sensing the weight of the moment. For a brief second, I thought Emily might actually agree. Her lips parted as though she was about to speak, but then she shook her head and let out a bitter laugh. "You're unbelievable," she said, standing up abruptly. "After everything we've done for you, keeping this place running, taking care of the kids, you have the nerve to demand money from us?" "Taking care of the kids?" I echoed, incredulous. "Emily, they're your children. That's literally your job." "And whose fault is it that I don't have one?" She shot back, her voice rising. "If I hadn't moved in here, where would we be? Living on the streets? At least we're helping you by being here." "Helping me?" I repeated, my patience wearing thin. "How exactly are you helping me by refusing to contribute financially? By making excuses instead of stepping up? By laughing in my face when I asked for support?" "That's enough." Mark interjected, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. He stood between us, his expression unreadable. "Look, this isn't getting us anywhere. We'll figure something out, okay? Just give us some time." Time. That word again. How many times had I given them chances, extensions, reprieves? And what had it gotten me? More debt, more stress, more resentment. But arguing further wouldn't solve anything, not tonight anyway. So I nodded stiffly and left the room before I said something I'd regret. Over the next few weeks, things grew even more strained. Emily avoided me whenever possible, retreating into her own little world with the kids. Mark, on the other hand, seemed torn, caught between loyalty to his wife and guilt over the situation. Occasionally, he tried to broach the subject with me, mumbling vague apologies or promises to sort things out. But nothing ever came of it. Meanwhile, the pressure continued to mount. The deadline for the hospital bill loomed closer, and I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling as panic clawed at my chest. Desperation drove me to drastic measures. I started selling off old furniture, jewelry, anything of value I could find around the house. Each sale brought temporary relief, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Then one afternoon, as I rummaged through the attic searching for items to sell, I stumbled upon something unexpected, a box labeled Grandma's papers. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it, revealing stacks of yellowed documents tied neatly with string. Among them was a handwritten will, dated shortly before her death. As I scanned the pages, my heart skipped a beat. The house, the very house we were all living in, wasn't solely mine. According to Grandma's will, ownership was supposed to be split equally between Emily and me. Somehow, I'd never known about this clause. Either Emily had conveniently forgotten to mention it, or worse, she deliberately withheld the information. My stomach churned as realization dawned. All these years, she'd been living here not just as a guest, but as someone entitled to half the property. No wonder she acted like she owned the place. No wonder she felt justified in refusing to pay rent. In her mind, she already had paid, by virtue of inheritance. But did that mean she was right? Did she deserve to live here rent-free simply because Grandma had intended for us to share ownership? Or was I within my rights to demand compensation, especially since I'd been the one maintaining the house all along? Conflicted and overwhelmed, I sought advice from Sarah, a close friend who happened to be a lawyer. Over coffee at a nearby cafe, I explained the situation, leaving out no detail. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers thoughtfully against her mug. Legally speaking, she began, choosing her words carefully, you have grounds to enforce a co-ownership agreement. Since the house is technically half hers, she's also responsible for half the expenses. But enforcing it might get messy, especially if she refuses to acknowledge her obligations. What if I forced her out? I asked hesitantly. Could I do that? Sarah sighed, her expression sympathetic but firm. You could, but it would require legal action, and given the emotional stakes, it might destroy your relationship forever. Are you prepared for that? Her question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Was I ready to sever ties with my own sister over money? To turn our shared history into ashes? The idea terrified me, yet the alternative, continuing to sacrifice my well-being for hers, felt equally unbearable. That night, unable to sleep, I crept downstairs and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers I'd brought down from the attic. The clock ticked loudly in the background, each second echoing like a countdown to some inevitable reckoning. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, breaking the eerie stillness. As I sat there, wrestling with indecision, a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. It was of Emily and me as children, building a fort out of blankets in the backyard. We'd spent hours decorating it with fairy lights and pillows, giggling as we imagined ourselves as queens ruling over a magical kingdom. Back then, we'd been inseparable, bound by a love so pure it seemed untouchable. Now, looking at the woman she'd become, the woman who laughed at my pain, I struggled to reconcile the two versions of her. Had she always been this selfish, or had life hardened her in ways I couldn't understand? Was it possible to salvage what remained of our bond, or was it too late? Before I could answer those questions, the sound of footsteps startled me. I turned to see Mark standing in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he cleared his throat and stepped closer. We need to talk, he said quietly, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. His eyes darted toward the papers in front of me, and I quickly slid them aside, unsure how much he knew or suspected. About what? I asked cautiously. He hesitated, rubbing his temples as though trying to gather his thoughts. It's Emily, he admitted finally. She's different lately. Distant. I think she knows something's wrong, but she won't tell me what it is. I studied him, searching for signs of deception. Do you know about the will? I asked bluntly. His eyes widened, confirming my suspicion. She told you? No, I replied bitterly. I found out on my own. Funny, isn't it? After all these years, she never bothered to mention that the house belongs to both of us. Mark winced, guilt etched across his features. She didn't want to upset you. She thought. She thought what? I interrupted, my voice rising. That I wouldn't notice? That I'd just keep letting her freeload off me indefinitely? It's not like that, he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. She's scared, okay? Scared of losing control, of having to face reality. You don't know how hard things have been for her. Hard for her. I echoed incredulously. Try walking in my shoes for a day, Mark. Try dealing with constant pain, crippling debt, and a family that treats you like a bottomless ATM machine. Tell me how hard that is. He flinched, visibly shaken by my outburst. For a moment, he seemed on the verge of saying something, apologizing perhaps, or offering some kind of compromise. But instead, he stood abruptly, muttering something about needing fresh air, and left the room. Alone once more, I buried my face in my hands, tears streaming down my cheeks. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Family was supposed to lift you up, not drag you down. Yet here I was, trapped in a web of obligation and resentment, unsure how, or if, I could ever escape. And so, as the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor, I resolved to make a decision, one that would change everything. Whether it meant fighting for justice or sacrificing my pride, I knew I couldn't keep living in limbo.